I got more time than you all did.
Well,
Oh,
you kind of
my
earned,
goodness.
you came a long ways.
Oh, my goodness. Am I honored to be here this day. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
And I always start out with a prayer, as you know, an intentional prayer. And it goes like this. I ask that everything needing to be known is known here this day, and that all of my words and all of our words are clear and precise and uplifting and helpful and fun. And that for each and every one of us here, we are guided, guarded, protected, and connected throughout this entire experience, and that everything we say and do serves the highest and best good of the universe, ourselves, and everyone everywhere, and so be it. So it is. Well, as Jim mentioned to you, I was an avocado farmer for 28 years on the big island of Hawaii. And we started the Intenders back then, and after we had had a few Intenders circles going on, I ended up coming to the mainland and started out in the Bay Area in Sonoma, California, which is where I'm headed back to here after I leave here. And one of the first things I did was that I started looking for groups of people or people who stood for the highest good. And I traveled throughout California for the first year I was here, and I ran into a lot of people who were very spiritual and helping, and I was looking for people who were really integrating the highest good into their lives and who were willing to openly talk about that. And then I moved on to the Albuquerque area, and we started setting up workshops and met a friend named Dan Hunter up in Spring who introduced me to Carl and Charlotte. And when I first walked in here, the first thing that we started talking about was the highest good. And you know, there's something about it when you meet your soul family. Those who we have made agreements and arrangements with long ago, long before we even came into these bodies, to come into this time in history, this most fascinating, powerful time in history, pivotal time in history, to do something magnificent. And one of the guidelines I was looking for in order to find my soul family was people who openly lived the highest good. 40 years here in an industrial area in South Houston, holding the light. Carmel Temple. I wonder if you'd all just, since I can do this, would you mind just standing for a second? And we'll give Charlotte and Carl a round of applause for those 40 years. So it's like coming home for me here. I've been into Carmel Temple as much as I've been to any place as I've traveled across the world. And one of the places I traveled in the 80s, before we started the Intenders, was Indonesia. And I was going to Bali. You know me, I'm a storyteller, so you're going to get some stories today. And was going there because I was in the Bali biz at that time. I was making ladies' clothes because they had these beautiful boutiques there that they were creating. The textile industry there was really something. And so we were making things called these large-sized dresses, and they were for full-sized women because the Hawaiian women are full-sized women, generally speaking. And the full-sized women, they couldn't get dresses made in their sizes. So we were going to Bali and making these full-size dresses and did very well at it and selling them at flea markets. And I was farming my avocados in between. And this was supporting and augmenting the avocado farm going to Bali. And it was a fun experience. And one time I was there visiting in Bali and having picked out the fabrics for the dresses, and we rented these little motorbikes. I was with my friend Kathy, and we took the motorbikes up into the hills one day and went to a little tourist town called Ubud, a mountain town. And then we headed even back further into the dark, and I remember the canopy going over the road, and it was like we were going into a dark, jungly area, and we were just young and fearless and just going for it, and riding our little motorbikes down into the depths of Bali, into the center of the island, and came across a little village that you wouldn't normally. It was way off the beaten path. And we stopped there because there was one little store there, and there were some people milling around over in the distance, and there was a little shop, and stopped to have a Coca-Cola. And we're sitting there on a picnic table outside of a little shop with a dense, overgrown tropical jungle around us. And sure enough, there was a man sitting there just adjacent to us. He was about 5 foot tall. And his teeth were just bright white, and he had this huge grin, smile on his face and in his heart. And we got chatting for a few moments, and he told me a story. He told us both a story, and I'm going to tell you that story right now. He said that the villages in Bali, in Indonesia, that each particular village has a specialty of its own. Some villages were silversmiths, and that's where all the beautiful earrings and silver work that you see come out of that area come from. And some villages were batik dyers. They would take the textiles and make the beautiful fabrics. They would just, that whole village would do that. His particular village, the one we were in, was they were the fish carvers, and they made these beautiful colored, bright colored painted fish that you see that come out of Bali, and that Bali is actually pretty famous for. And he said that the way that they had created these fish for ever since he could remember in the village was that they would fall a tree, and then they would have these large bow saws where one man would get on one end and another man would get on the other end, and they would slowly cut the tree into thin slices. And it was a laborious task to cut a slice and then cut another one, and then after a while they'd have a whole stack of slices after a day's, or a morning's work doing all of this. And then they would take the slices of wood into the people in the other part of the village there, and they would carve them, and then they would take them to another group after they were carved to paint them. One day, one of the neighbors found and bought a chainsaw. And all of a sudden, the neighbor down the road was going vroom, 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 and everybody else was still on their bow saws, slowly taking a slice at a time, because that's the way they'd done it for eons. And some of the other neighbors noticed that this one neighbor was cutting the slices so fast that they got more chainsaws, and pretty soon a good portion of the people in the village, about half the people who were slicing the trees up, had chainsaws. And right away, the people who had the chainsaws were able to corner the market, because they could create 20 times more fish than everybody else. And then there was another factor too, and that was that the noise. Because what was once a beautiful, quiet, serene village in an isolated town with no electricity even, just barely starting to come in when I was there, now became chaotic noise. And so what happened was that after a period of time, the elders of the village got together, and they called a meeting. And they talked about this, and it was open to everybody. And the upshot of the meeting was that they decided that it was just best if they got rid of the chainsaws.